Hello students. As you know, in the previous lecture we started with the explanation of Francis Bacon's essay of friendship. Before we proceed with the next part of the essay, let me remind you that until now we have discussed Bacon's view upon companionship and concept of solitude, how friendship has medicinal and curative benefits, and how in ancient times monarchs and kings tried to buy this fruit of friendship at any cost. In today's class, we will get to see Bacon further elaborating upon various aspects of friendship. So let us start. Sylla, when he commanded Rome, raised Pompey, after surnamed the Great, to that height that Pompey wanted himself for Sylla's overmatch. So now Bacon comments upon some examples of friendship from Roman history. He says that when Sylla ruled the empire of Rome, he raised his friend and general Pompey to such great heights by naming and designating him as Pompey the Great. And after getting so much power, Pompey praised and boasted about being superior to Sylla. He presented himself as an overmatch to Sylla. For when he had carried the consulship for a friend of his against the pursuit of Sylla, and that Sylla did a little resent thereat and began to speak great, Pompey turned upon him again and in effect bade him be quiet. And he did this to such an extent that on one occasion Sylla had some disagreement with Pompey over a decision and Sylla resented it, but Pompey, consumed by arrogance and power, scolded him and even asked him to be quiet. And what did he say? He said, for that more man adored the sun rising than the sun setting. He said, he is the rising sun of this empire and calling Sylla the setting sun. Therefore, people will favor the rising sun over the setting sun, hinting at the power that he had acquired at that time. So, this is one example where a king's generosity and friendly behavior towards his general in turn proved to be a great mistake. With Julius Caesar, Decimus Brutus had obtained that interest as he set him down in his testament for heir in remainder after his nephew. Next, Bacon talks about Julius Caesar, another Roman general and statesman. Brutus, the Roman senator and advisor of Caesar, had gained the favor of close friendship, and as a reward of the close friendship and advices provided by Brutus, Caesar made him his heir after his nephew. And this was the man that had power with him to draw him forth to his death. And Caesar's blind trust in Brutus caused his downfall, as later he was murdered by Brutus, bring forth to his death. For when Caesar would have discharged the Senate in regard of some ill presages and specially a dream of Calpurnia, this man lifted him gently by the arm out of his chair, telling him he hoped he would not dismiss the Senate till his wife had dreamt a better dream. So what happened? After suspecting and fearing some terrible event, and especially because of his wife's bad dream, he decided to dissolve the Senate, but Brutus convinced Caesar to hold back his decision until Calpurnia dreamt something better. And This man lifted him gently by the arm out of his chair, telling him he hoped he would not dismiss the Senate till his wife had dreamed a better dream, and it seemeth his favour was so great, as Antonius, in a letter which is recited verbatim in one of Cicero's Philippics, calleth him Venefica, which as if he had enchanted Caesar. And it seemed that he had such powerful hold over Caesar that Antonius, another Roman politician and general, in one of his letter, as mentioned by Cicero in his speech, called Brutus a Venefica. Venefica meaning an enchantress, a witch who had enchanted Caesar for his evil purposes. Next. Augustus raised Agrippa, though of mean birth, to that height, as when he consulted with Maecenas about the marriage of his daughter Julia, Maecenas took the liberty to tell him that he must either marry his daughter to Agrippa or take away his life. Augustus, another Roman emperor, befriended Agrippa, his consul, and gave him high position in royal society, though he was born in an ordinary family, not in a noble family. And he gave him power, praise, privilege to such an extent that when Augustus decided to marry his daughter Julia, his counselor Maecenas suggested marrying her to Agrippa. Maecenas took the liberty to tell him that he must either marry his daughter to Agrippa or take away his life. So, when he decided to marry his daughter, Maecenas suggested marrying her to Agrippa, as there was no way anyone else could marry her. He was the best man for her. And if the emperor decided otherwise, Agrippa had to be killed by Augustus, as there was no third option, as he had made him so great. With Tiberius Caesar, Sejanus had ascended to that height, as they two were termed and reckoned as a pair of friends. Bacon then next gives the example of close friendship between Tiberius and Sejanus. Sejanus charmed Tiberius and they become close companions, and they were a two close pair of friends. Tiberius in a letter to him saith, Hac pro amicitia nostra non occultavi, and it's a Latin phrase, and the whole Senate dedicated an altar to friendship as to a goddess in respect of the great dearness of friendship between them two. So what happened? Sejanus also got power and privilege through this friendship, and in a letter to Sejanus, Tiberius boldly declared that he had not hidden their close friendship with anyone. This Latin phrase, hac pro amicitia nostra non occlusivi, means that he had not hidden their close friendship with anyone, and Senate and the whole Senate dedicated an altar to friendship, and the Senate considered their friendship so as something to be worshipped and dedicated an altar to it, as if their bond was so supreme and noble, like a goddess, in respect of the great dearness of friendship between them two. Their friendship was something to be worshipped like a goddess. The like or more was between Septimus Severus and Plotinus, for he forced his eldest son to marry the daughter of Plotinus and would often maintain Plotinus in doing affronts to his son. A similar or even closer friendship had developed between Septimus Severus and Plotinus, and Septimus also forced his son to marry the daughter of Plotinus, and their friendship was so much strong that even Plotinus' hurtful remarks and insults to his son couldn't weaken their bond, and did write also in a letter to the Senate by these words: I love the man so well as I wish he may overlive me. And his love for Plotinus went beyond reason and logic when Septimius, in one of his letters to the Senate, rambled over his love for him, and even wished his friend to outlive him in this world. Now, if these princesses had been as a Trajan or a Marcus Aurelius, a man might have thought that this had proceeded of an abundant goodness of nature, but being men so wise, of such strength and severity of mind, and so extreme lovers of themselves as all these were, it proveth most plainly that they found their own felicity, though as great as ever happened to mortal man, but as an half peace. So now Bacon says all the characters and historical figures that he mentioned above were not simpleton or soft minded people like Trajan or Marcus Aurelius. If a man might have thought that this had proceeded of an abundant goodness of nature, but being men so wise, of such strength and severity of mind, and so extreme lovers of themselves. But these people were wise people with great political intelligence and strength, who took their decisions relating to government very carefully, and still they went to extreme lengths in matters of friendship. So Bacon explains the fact that it proveth most plainly that they found their own felicity, though as great as ever happened to mortal man, but as an half peace. So still they went to extreme lengths in matters of friendship. So Bacon explained the fact that these powerful persons craved for friends in their life, in spite of having access to all the pleasures and luxuries of life, and having all the dear relatives of wives, sons, nephews, and yet all these could not supply the comfort of friendship. So, having all the relations of wives, sons, and nephew, they felt something was missing from their peace of life, as in half peace. It was a half peace. So, something was missing from their peace of life, and that missing piece was a friend, and which they tried to gain at any cost. And later, they wanted to have the comfort of friendship, and they tried to gain this at any cost. And later, the same precious friends brought them defeat, disaster, and even death in some cases. It is not to be forgotten what Cominius observeth of his first master, Duke Charles the Hardy, namely that he would communicate his secrets with none, and least of all those secrets which troubled him most. Now Bacon gives another example. Cominius, a writer and diplomat who served under Duke Charles Hardy and later Louis XI of France, has said in his writings that his former master, Duke Hardy, would never share any secrets with anyone, and especially the secrets about especially the secrets that he considered critical to him and to his rule, and least of all those secrets which troubled him most. Whereupon he goeth on and saith that towards his later time that closeness did impair and a little perish his understanding. So, but towards the later time of his life, when he grew old his mental faculties got worsened just because of his secrecy that put a burden upon his mind. Closeness did damage his mind, and a little perish his understanding. Surely Cominius might have made the same judgment also if it had pleased him of his second master, Louis the XI, whose closeness was indeed his tormentor. And a similar judgment can be made about his later master Louis XI, who was also a man of reclusive and secretive nature. He too suffered because of his secrecy and closeness. His secrecy and closeness became his tormentor. Now, Bacon is citing these examples to emphasize importance of having a friend with whom one can share the joys and sorrows of one's heart, so one might feel relieved of different emotions that sometimes become a torture to one's heart. The parable of Pythagoras is dark but true. Cor ni edito. Eat not the heart. Here, Bacon points at the parable given by Pythagoras, cor ni edito, meaning eat not the heart. Certainly, if a man would give it a hard phrase, those that want friends to open themselves unto are cannibals of their own hearts. Pythagoras had his doubts about who can be called as true friends, so he invented this phrase, eat not the heart, and a very harsh way of describing the risk of close friendships. And he felt that people who seek friends to unburden their heart from worries and tensions are actually eating their own heart, like a cannibal. Cannibal is someone who eats flesh of other human being. So it is like eating the flesh of their own kind. Especially, and when does it happen? Especially when trust is being broken. It's like eating your own self. So surrender of oneself before even the closest friend might lead to unwanted consequences causing harm. Are cannibals of their own hearts, but one thing is most admirable. I will conclude this first fruit of friendship, which is that this communicating of a man's self to his friend works two contrary effects, for it redoubleth joys and cutteth griefs in halves. Here Bacon concludes the first fruit of friendship and finds it admirable how at times deep friendship works for two different effects. First, it redoubleth joys, meaning it doubles our joys. And second, reduces the griefs. Cutteth griefs in halves, reduces the grief. Reduces the griefs, for there is no man that imparteth his joys to his friend, but he joyeth the more, and no man that imparteth his griefs to his friend, but he grieveth the less. Even today, this is a common saying that happiness grows and griefs reduces when we share it with others. But Bacon here gives it to a very practical point of view when he says, for there is no man that imparteth his joys to his friend, but he joyeth the more, and no man that imparteth his griefs to his friend, but he grieveth the less. So he says, such happiness may be illusory, not real, because in reality, there is no man who increases his happiness by sharing it to his friend, and no man reduces his grief in such way. This is not realistic. It's all an illusion that we create for our own comfort. So this concept is not true, that we reduces our griefs by sharing it and we increases our happiness by sharing it. Next he says, so that it is in truth of operation upon a man's mind of like their stone for a man's body, that it worketh all contrary effects, but still to the good and benefit of nature. For in bodies union union strengtheneth and cherisheth any natural action, and on the other side weakeneth and dulleth any violent impression, and even so it is of minds. So here Bacon puts a scientific point of view when he says that it is in truth of operation upon a man's mind of like virtue as the alchemists used to attribute to their stone for man's body. He says, like alchemists treat human body with some remedies that removes pain at the risk of having opposite reactions, and same is the case with friendship that might cure one with mental suffering at the risk of possible harm. So that it worketh all contrary effects, but still to the good and benefit of nature. But yet, without praying in aid of alchemists, there is a manifest image of this in the ordinary course of nature. Nature also shows that a union of two elements, like the union of two friends, results in better and more improved thing. Even if there is an element of faith and risk, human friendship can cure and soothe the injuries of heart. For in bodies union strengtheneth and cherisheth any natural action, and on the other side weakeneth and dulleth any violent impression, and even so it is of minds. So it's like a double-edged sword that sometimes it soothes the injuries of the heart and sometimes it gives us pain. So it's a double-edged sword working for two different purposes. So students, this much for today's class. We shall continue with the remaining part of the essay in the next lecture. Thank you.